This chapter was actually rather simple, but something that's extremely consistent throughout it is the tension. And it's really impressive how Akutami has managed to build up this amount of tension in such a short amount of time. It's actually not the easiest thing to do, but when you have characters that are like this, Naoya, Yuta, Yuji, and Choso, very individual, iconic, influential type of characters that are basically the pinnacle of their power, the presence that they hold themselves, everything kind of leeches off of them to add to that tension, to build this very overwhelming and sickening atmosphere before the clash begins. Building up this tension is extremely important, and while it definitely is headlined by Yuta's appearance and the introduction that he makes being both spiritually but physically overwhelming, he doesn't just walk in onto the scene without any repercussions whatsoever. He jumps off something and falls onto the ground and it completely breaks apart underneath him. He comes in with a statement, and not to mention just prior to that, his presence suffocates everyone on the battlefield when he arrives. Which when you have very powerful individuals like Yuji, Choso, and even Naoya, Yuta being able to do that is so influential into building that said tension or atmosphere. And it makes for this complex and unnerving situation that is currently building. These four individuals are about to clash. You don't know when, you don't know how, you don't know what method people are going to go for, but you know it's coming. And it somewhat keeps you on the edge of your seat, anticipating that peak, that split in moment where everything happens within an instant, where all of these characters start rushing one another. What helps emphasize this even more, because yes, there is more here, is funny enough how the chapter is actually structured. It's almost like a gradual rise, that you can see things getting extremely tense and tighter by the minute. But at the forefront of the chapter, you have this very simple, minimalistic encounter between all of these individuals, figuring out who everyone is. Now you're having this very playful personality breaks up this tension extremely well and actually grounds it back into reality. And while he actually doesn't seem as playful compared to the previous time we've seen him, I think that in itself goes a long way in showing how serious this situation is also. So while he still has a bit of quirk and humor towards the situation, it's very withdrawn, and it's specifically because of Yuta and him not really being sure on what this individual is, especially with the introduction that Yuta did have. Obviously Naoya and Yuta come to an agreement to verse Choso and Yuji, and to somewhat keep Yuji alive so Naoya can use him as bait. Of course, not mentioning that he wants to draw out Megami to sign over the head of the Zenin clan back to Naoya. So there's a bit of misdirection, which is bound to be a thing with how secretive a lot of these characters are and how deceptive Naoya can be. But I like that even though he has this type of demeanor about himself, Yuta just brushes everything off. You can tell he's the pinnacle of this chapter for that specific reason. Any sort of secrecy, any sort of deception, any sort of unwillingness is completely obliterated by Yuta's presence alone. His very minimalistic use of words, the demeanor that he upholds, the intense aura that surrounds him. It's very intoxicating and takes a lot of your attention as a reader away from everyone else, which is perfectly fine. Within these moments, you have Yuji and Choso plotting and scheming on what they should and shouldn't do. And it's very nice to see Choso formulating a plan with the intention of helping Yuji. The brother situation is a consistent thing, but the more it's played upon, the more relatable or genuine it becomes. It's something that you can appreciate, because as much as Choso could have centered this whole plan around himself, he centers it away from himself and specifically around Yuji, which is very caring, it's very human-like, and we have to consistently remind ourselves that he isn't a human, he's a cursed spirit. So seeing him grow in these increments with Yuji by his side is very beautiful. It's something that I really enjoy seeing, and as easy or smooth as his words were, the way he comes to a conclusion is very snappy. He's quick to cancel different options and opinions out to value the best option for Yuji, and that is running away from Yuta. Don't fight him, don't try and confront him, don't do anything relating to Yuta, because you will just get obliterated like Gojo. They are very similar in that regard, so just run as best you can. Now I loved how this intensity snapped. Everything was bubbling up with all of these characters speaking and figuring out what they were going to do, and then within an instant you see everyone move life all at once. And it's actually rather impressive when you have this very small understanding of Naoya and Yuta, two very different individuals, one that is very similar to Gojo and another one that is extremely quick, but also having Yuji and Choso react respectfully to that. They don't just completely get obliterated, they hold their own against these two very powerful individuals. Choso was going for an opportunity to at least slow down Yuta. Naoya obviously gets in his way very quickly and stops that from happening. So now you have two completely separate fights. You have Naoya and Choso on one side and Yuji running away from Yuta. I'd be lying if I said that I wasn't inherently interested in this Choso and Naoya fight. I think they are an extremely good lineup for one another, but I'm not necessarily sure on who would win. I don't think either of them are going to die, but it's difficult to put my thumb on how this situation comes to a conclusion. Considering how new and prevalent both of these individuals are, it's safe to assume it's probably going to either come to a stalemate or it's going to be interrupted to some degree. But I'm hoping we get to play on it a little bit further just so we can see Choso evolve a little bit more. We've seen so much from him already, but just knowing that there's a lot of emotion and anger fueling him right now makes for a very valuable dynamic. Someone that is borderline obnoxious and playful, and then you have Choso, who is now fueled with a little bit of rage thanks to the approach they took with Yuji and threatening his safety. Now, there's something that is just absolutely lovable about seeing Yuji and Yuta go hand to hand. There's no crazy abilities coming out as of yet. If anything, it's just more of an endurance battle. Who's faster, who's stronger, who can take the most hits, who can deceive better than the other. There's a lot of different opportunities to play on here, but it's always impressive when you build up a character like Yuta to be so monumental and have Yuji not necessarily counter him easy, but at least weave through the lines at max potential. None of these two are breaking a sweat, but they're so zoned in or focused on this situation, and they are well and truly putting in a bit of effort. I highly doubt there's much killing intent there, and more so Yuta just testing the waters, considering I assume he wouldn't have to use all of his abilities that often. Most likely what he's putting in for Yuji is enough to belittle an individual rather quickly. So the waters are being tested. Yuji's on the back burner, dodging a lot of different things, but he gets behind a car and completely punches it towards Yuta's direction. And it's funny because he instantly sends it back, while Yuji's trying to figure out where he should go next into some more close quarters scenarios to conceal himself. The very same car he threw comes flying back, with Yuta mentioning alongside it that he doesn't really seem like the physical strong type, that Yuta and him are polar opposites. But you see the very dense amount of cursed energy that he has, which makes him borderline unstoppable, that you can't tell or perceive where his attacks are coming from by reading his cursed energy, nor can you hurt him all too much, because his cursed energy minimalizes the amount of damage that he takes. Think of it as an armor that is constantly moving, because there's just such an overwhelming amount of it, and he has more than Gojo, but it's not as refined as Gojo's, nor is it limitless like Gojo's, who barely uses any. When using different techniques, it's troublesome for Yuji to figure out where he should even begin. He's not going to let himself be killed by Yuta, but he's also not really sure on where to start with trying to crack that cursed armor that Yuta obviously has. For the most part, this brings the chapter to a conclusion. We leave it on a pretty massive cliffhanger on where this fight is actually going to go. Yuta and Yuji face to face with one another, with Yuji not really sure on how he wants to approach the situation, but still having that strong self-confidence that he's not going to let himself die here. I'm extremely excited to see how these fights continue to play out, especially with Yuji coming to terms with how to handle Yuta to any sort of degree. At the moment, at least, there's not all too many kinks within Yuta's armor. No weak spots, no places where he could crack or break through, so he truly has to figure out something to catch Yuta on his off foot, to catch him either within his lowest point or truly try to escape as best he can. And even while both options are very plausible, it's hard to see Yuji running away so desperately. Even though that was his original intention, trying to get to smaller buildings, I think now he may show off a bit of power to give him some sort of a peak to escape. Whether it be a massive divergent fist, or more likely a black flash, maybe even a portion of Sukuna's power, but something is going to have to come out to play to give those handful of seconds of Yuta to reevaluate Yuji even further, to realize that there's a lot to him as an individual and he has that power stored within, but he hasn't been taking this situation as a confrontational one. He's been running away. For Yuta to evaluate those handful of seconds seconds and may give Yuji a chance to vanish in plain sight and disappear. And obviously I'm very curious on Choso's situation. I am not sure at all how that is going to come to a conclusion or who is even going to win that fight. It'd be funny if Hikari, of all people, was to come back into the picture, especially if he was teamed up or duoing with Yuta. I'm not sure how well they get along, but it would be a nice way to add a very monumental curveball to the situation, if Akutami wanted to do that. Definitely doesn't have to. This scenario is massive enough as it is, but there's always a lot of different things that can come into play, especially within a city that is very unpredictable. It's basically just an unused battleground waiting to be obliterated. And at this time we have all of the powerful individuals in place, just waiting to explode and show off what they're truly capable of. So with that being said, that is basically it. Let me know what you think about the chapter. What do you think is going to happen with Naoya and Choso? And do you think Yuji and Yuta is going to continue into a much bigger thing? Or is it going to crumble and break apart so a split moment comes forward that allows Yuji to escape? I'd love to hear your thoughts. But I want to thank you all for watching. Hope you enjoyed. Drink plenty of water and I will see you within the next one. Goodbye.